Labyrinths is brought to you by Knox Robinson Productions. Please consider becoming a patron. For as little as $5 a month, you can listen to Labyrinths ad-free.
Visit patreon.com/Knox Robinson to learn more.
I went to his funeral in November of 2002. And on the way back from that, on the plane, I drew the world map on a piece of paper and marked the highest summit on each continent. And I said to myself, I'm going to go to these by human power, as had Goran. So the accident happened in September. I went to his funeral in November. February 1st, I was bicycling north to Alaska, towing my climbing gear, studded tires on my wheels.
Feeling lost?
Then you're in the right place.
I'm Amanda Knox.
And I'm Christopher Robinson.
And this is Labyrinths.
When Erden Eruc's close friend and fellow adventurer, Goran Krupp, died in a climbing accident, Erden dedicated his life to adventure as a tribute to his friend, with a plan to circumnavigate the globe alone and entirely by human power, and to summit the tallest peaks on 6 continents. He is now an 18-time Guinness World Record holder, but strangely, the greater his heights of achievement, the lower he felt.
I am a Turkish American living in the Pacific Northwest since 1999. And back in 1997, I was in an office in Washington, D.C., in Silver Spring, Maryland. And there was a world map hanging on the wall. And this was a special map with the Pacific in the middle, Americas on the right, Old World on the left. And I would stand in front of this thing between coding sessions. I was in IT back then. And trace my finger across that from DC over the Bering Straits to Turkey, wondering if I could do that by human power.
Why would you think that? I mean, sure, but also, why that?
Yeah, I have been active all my life. My father took me up my first mountain at age 11, up an extinct volcano in south central Turkey, about 4,000 meters tall. And since then, I considered myself a mountaineer, stayed active, climbed big walls before 1997, and also ran marathons. I was a wrestler through college. So thinking about such a physical challenge was not foreign to me. And I think just being stuck in an office, gazing out the window, planning the next trip down to the nearby rocks at New River Gorge or Seneca Rocks, or up to New Hampshire to climb ice. I just made a career out of daydreaming because I was stuck in an office and just was not who I wanted to be, though I pursued an MBA trying to convince me otherwise. And got my executive MBA eventually in 99, and I moved to Seattle. So thinking of projects like that was not a foreign idea to me. And I thought that I could, and having an engineer's mind, of course, I immediately started asking, could I do this? How would I do it? And how I was going to find the money, how I was going to find the time. All of these how questions were each a problem to be solved. And having an engineer's mind, being a problem solver, wired that way, I took that as a familiar turf, and it eventually evolved into a project management challenge too, because as you would imagine, there are a lot of moving parts. Many people had to get involved, and I had to get a lot of things done at the same time.
Like what? Can you give some examples of that?
I had to, for example, gather the skills that I needed, and one of those was ocean rowing. I had to master the oceans. I had to get an ocean rowing boat, refit it perhaps, and get food and other items ready on that. I had to get a life raft, and the boat itself had to be registered. It was an imported vessel from United Kingdom. And at the end of that, I could have a Washington state license so that I could present a title of ownership at a foreign port so that they would let me in, and eventually, when I wanted to depart, give me a certificate to depart. Port clearance document would be necessary on arrival at the other end. On my last ocean crossing, for example, from California to the Philippines by way of Hawaii and Guam, I was working with a weather router, a friend of mine, Jason Christensen, and he was able to coordinate with the Coast Guard, and we had a retired NOAA commander on our team, Mark Miller. He also was involved coordinating with the Coast Guard, and we were identifying the nearest ships around me 200 miles away so that if a hurricane came by, we would be preparing for an orderly retreat. And I had left late from Crescent City with the intention of going to China nonstop, but I didn't have a visa to China. I had to stop at Hawaii to try one more time. So these different moving parts, including the finances, including getting our paperwork in order with my wife before I launched, all the will to be updated and such.
Oh, God.
All of these have to happen, and it is part of the challenge. And I am glad to say that I was able to handle all of these. It wasn't easy at the beginning. With each ocean crossing that followed after the first one, it became easier. I was experienced. I knew what to look for. I knew what to improve. I knew what to take with me. And each crossing became a journey toward a demonstration of mastery. And so getting across these oceans is never an accidental success. It is a planned affair. One needs to study climatological data going back 10, 15 years and try to get a sense of what the ocean will offer at a given location at a given time of the year. The ocean is fairly consistent, or used to be, and I was able to then plan 30 miles a day, 1,000 miles a month kind of pace on any crossing. Then looking at the storm data, storm seasons and such, I could decide when to leave and the departure port. Once those were set, then everything after that would be a statistical challenge. And if things changed along the way, it would come back to normal eventually. So if the ocean allowed me to carry on, I would take advantage of what it offered and make progress. And if it challenged me, a low pressure came, things changed, wind was blowing differently, I could then try to slow it down using a power anchor, perhaps stall for time, rest, recover, or I could just be out there in a strong wind blowing seas and run with it and just stay out there, be steeled to stay out 24 hours. My record is 42 hours on approach to the Philippines on my last crossing, where I was trying to avoid strong currents among the islands to get into this one bay, Albay Gulf, where I could reach Legazpi at the end of it, west end of it. So
all of that just sounds incredibly exhausting to me.
If one is mentally prepared for that kind of a challenge, then that becomes the price one has to pay to achieve success, if you want to call it that, because there's a goal, there's a destination, that's where I'm trying to get to, and I know what it takes, then I must deliver.
How many ocean crossings have you done in your ocean crossing career?
If I were to count, so I became the first person to have rowed 3 oceans by the time I got to Madagascar from Australia. So it was the Atlantic Ocean in 2006. It was the Pacific to Papua New Guinea waters from California in 2007, 2008, and then in 2010 across the Indian Ocean. And then again, South Atlantic, this time from Namibia to Venezuela, 5,500 miles. That was my fourth crossing. Smaller bodies of water like the Caribbean and Gulf of Mexico and the Coral Sea, we're not counting. And and then I crossed the Pacific Ocean again from North America to Philippines, which became the first from North America to Asia registered as such, and that's the 18th record that was registered. So I have 1,084 days total spent solo on the oceans on my rowboat.
That's wild. That's a long time.
Yes, 1,167 days total, with including my two-person rows. And those are standing records right now, 2 of the 18 that I hold.
Wow. So can I just sit with that for a little bit? Because you've spent a significant portion of your life just alone out on some water.
Yeah, 1,084 days. That's just about 3 years. Given my age, that would be about 5% of my life.
What does that do to a person? Like, do you feel changed from that experience? Because, I mean, in one way, that sounds like a very freeing, amazing experience. In another way, someone might say it's like solitary confinement because you're just trapped. So how has this impacted who you are and how you experience the world?
One could look at it as being trapped as a jail sentence, self-imposed solitude. Can also be interpreted as a monk in a cave meditating, finding himself. So there are 2 ways to look at this. I am comfortable in my own skin. I had to become that if I wanted to do it again, right? So if I kept going back at it, I wasn't resenting it. The only crossing that I really resented was my 2007-2008 attempt to row from California to Australia. And during that crossing, we had strong La Nina conditions, which delivered stronger equatorial winds. And they were trapping me in between the 2 wind regimes where the countercurrent resides running east. So I couldn't cross south past the countercurrent, and I would go in circles. There was one episode where I was stuck for 13 days going in circles, like couldn't make progress south.
Wow.
And then I had to escape just north of Papua New Guinea. I was in the wrong hemisphere in the wrong season. It was May, and the typhoon season had already started 400 nautical miles northwest of me near Palau. A Typhoon Ramasoon formed, and that became a Category 4 typhoon that ran up north toward Japan. And that changed the wind regimes a little bit, and I could get close to Papua New Guinea waters. Otherwise, I was just stuck right around the equator for the longest time. The ocean was mighty, and of course, I am puny in strength and abilities compared to what the ocean can throw at me. I just could not change my destiny, and I had to accept that. We tried to do a resupply, and that didn't work well. And then we arranged a pickup. The Philippine fishermen were in the area catching tuna. They had a whole fleet out there, and they came and towed me to a larger vessel that had a crane, put me on their deck, and then hauled me and my boat to the Philippines. So the beauty of what I do is that during the journey, those who encounter what I do and get exposed to what the journey entails understand perfectly the commitment and the sweat equity that it takes, and that engenders curiosity, a degree of respect perhaps, and it creates this sense of hospitality and friendship, and all of these things are the best parts of human nature. They became part of my journey as well. And I think I learned early on that I am secondary to the journey, that I need to push the journey forward, live up to my promises, and honor the journey.
That's a really beautiful sentiment. And I wonder if that's kind of a unique thing about these kinds of stories, because I mean, I've interviewed numerous people actually who've undertaken these kinds of journeys before, although we should get to how rare these kinds of choices are. But I just happen to have talked to a few people. Like, I have some friends right now who are biking through South Africa, and they also similarly said something along the lines of their favorite part of the experience was meeting people along the way, and how they were like the warmth and the hospitality of people who were sort of in awe of the journey itself. What is it about these journeys that resonate with us as human beings, and why do they seem to have a life of their own beyond the person who chose to make the journey?
Well, we can always fall back on Joseph Campbell and the hero's journey, and how if one follows his bliss, there will be invisible hands opening doors ahead of you, and then you will coast through, right? So it's a universal feature of humanity where we seek these stories and we reflect on these stories, and that's how inspiration happens, that's how comparison happens, and that's how we gauge where we stand in humanity with our own challenges, and understand that, hey, we are capable of doing more. Of course, there were recognitions that I tried to offer, talking about who did what, and tried to carry their name in my blogs and my stories and in my write-ups. And that's payback, but that's secondary. I don't think this sponsorship deal where they would get branding and recognition was part of it, because I was never that famous to create that kind of value for anyone, but they did it nonetheless, and they were there for me. So one of the biggest lessons that I learned is that the people that I need would show up on my path. And therefore I could launch with full faith that I would be okay when I reached the other side, arriving in a yellow rowboat that I had. Of course, it was a different, unique craft. And when I stood next to that rowboat, it was clear there had to be a lot of effort. There had to be a lot of grit to get that thing across this big body of water. And I then received that attention that a person arriving in a big yacht would never have, or a cruise ship. They would have been just seen as wallets with 2 feet.
Right.
But I arrived in a rowboat. It was a whole different deal. And when I got to Papua New Guinea eventually, so going back to the Philippine fishermen, they picked me up in May of 2008. And then after the typhoon season ended, January of 2009, they dropped me off at the same spot. And I stayed on the water another 21 days or so on the Bismarck Sea to bring the boat to shore. The villagers there have the tradition of the women passing on these stories. So when I returned there to carry on with the journey and with the logistics of the rowboat done, I was told that the story of the man in a yellow boat had reached the villages up in the hills, and everybody knew about it by the time that I returned there. So it became part of this oral tradition out there. Maybe the story is still echoing somehow.
Hey listeners, thanks for tuning in. This podcast can only exist thanks to listener support. So please consider becoming a patron. Visit patreon.com/Knox Robinson.
That's nice. The man with the yellow boat. I'm just curious about needing to be so prepared and doing all of your homework and doing all of this logistics prior to. But then at a certain point, you just have to have faith and know that you're going to be encountering challenges that you can't anticipate, and you're going to need help that you can't plan for. You just sort of have to have faith that that help is going to happen. And do you find people coming to you asking for advice on how to do their own journey? Or is this just something that you have lived personally and it's just your own private thing?
Now that I am done with my own journey, I do have occasionally adventurers reaching out if they want to do similar things. Just recently, for example, I was honored to have a Belgian bicyclist, or adventurer, I should say, on his way to Alaska. He is going by human power from the lowest point on any one continent to the highest point on that continent. And so he started at Death Valley, and then he was bicycling up through here, and he wanted to hear more about my approach route to Mount McKinley. And I had walked in the length of the Kahiltna Glacier after bicycling to the south of the mountain. We walked up the Kahiltna Glacier. Another two friends flew in with additional supplies at the base camp, and then the five of us continued on to the summit. So that was an experience that he thought would be valuable. Yele was his name, and Ollie is another adventurer who is British. He is doing the 7 summits. So he wanted similar information. So I had images to show, maps to show, experiences to share. And I think I was able to encourage them to carry on.
That's great. You mentioned offhand that you had a wife throughout all of this experience. What was her journey with you being gone so long?
That journey was a bigger one, I think. So going back to the map that I traced on the wall. So I was in the IT world. I was a software developer, programmer, eventually got my MBA, worked my way toward a project manager role. And that's why I came to Seattle, where I could be part of the project managers. And it was a software project. We were working with Federal Occupational Health. Their office was in Chicago. And when I visited the Chicago office, that's where I ran across Nancy. And we met in the coffee room. And she said, "Well, I haven't met you before." I said, "Well, I'm with the Seattle group visiting for a requirements gathering meeting." And she said, "What do you do there?" And I was I was being smart, and I said, "Would you like to know what I'd rather do?" That was my comeback. And she said, "What's that?" And I said, "I'd like to go around the world by human power."
That's way cooler than software engineering, I'm
And
just
then,
going
of
to
course,
say.
she had to know more, and we had lunch, and that was rest is history. And I was in charge of what I was doing to the best extent that I could, given nature's fickle ways. But she was at home alone, wondering, and she knew as much as I would tell her. And she trusted my instincts and my common sense and my abilities and my preparation. So she would keep a level head about this whole thing as much as I did before I committed to this life of adventure, shall we say. I gave her 3 promises. I will not die, we will not go bankrupt, and I will not lose you. So those were the 3 promises, and I lived up to those.
No small task.
I am here, and she is still here, and we're doing okay. And when we got the chance to climb with Goran for the first time, so Goran is Goran Krupp, is the Swedish adventurer who had bicycled from Sweden to Nepal back in '96. He wrote a book about it called The Ultimate High, and he towed all of his climbing gear there behind his bicycle on a trailer and reached Nepal and climbed up the mountain.
That is Mount Everest. Krupp became the first Scandinavian to climb Mount Everest without oxygen, one of his many feats of mountaineering.
But he was known in the community, and he was famous, and he would do presentations as part of his sponsors' tour that they had organized. He came to Seattle in the summer of 2001 to do a presentation, and Nancy had also read his book by then, Ultimate High, and we excitedly went, and so I got to meet Goran ahead of his presentation. And when I shared with him my thoughts that I could go around the world by human power, he said, "When are you starting? Do you have sponsors?" So until then, when I talked about such ideas, people would try to size me up. Have you done anything like that before? Was a common comeback. I hated that question, and people seem to be wired for that question. And when I talk about big ideas, I still get that. I would have my rowboat tied to the dock, about to launch the next day, and somebody would walk up and say, "Have you done anything like that before? Have you crossed an ocean before?" Like, how about if you ask me how I prepared? What did I do to get ready? Just ask me different questions. But have you done it like that before? It seems to be just as close to an insult as one can get. I am prepared.
Right.
I am ready. I have this idea. I got this thing in motion. So why don't you just sit back and watch?
Yeah.
So I learned early on that not everybody needed to know, and I had to pursue those who had similar experiences. And if I couldn't reach them, there were books, there were journals, and I could find information somehow and learn. And as I did, Yoram became one of those characters. So when we find the right people, they challenge us. Our professors, our teachers give us homework and make us work hard and sweat, right? So it's part of the growth process. We may resent it momentarily, but then we are guided in a direction that's going to make us wiser, stronger, better prepared for our own lives in the future. So when I met Yaron like that, we had to make plans to go climb together. And he disappeared. He went and climbed Everest one more time and came back. And I got this phone call saying, "Okay, I am in the area. Why don't we go climbing?" September 30th of 2002, we met at Frenchman Coulee in eastern Washington.
The air guitar route at Frenchman Coulee is a clean vertical crack climb without significant protrusions. It's a 60-foot climb up a basalt wall, requiring precise cam and nut placements, and it's rated a 5.10A, an incredibly difficult climb for an amateur, but not one that deterred an experienced mountaineer like Krupp.
And that's when we had an unfortunate accident. It was a short climb, and I was the belayer at the bottom, and he fell. His climbing protection did not hold as it should have in the rock, and so there was a catastrophic failure of his protection system. He fell and he hit the ledge I was on and then ended up on the trail that was just below.
Joran was near the top when he fell. An investigation carried out later by the American Alpine Club determined that a sequence of accidents had occurred, either due to improper gear placement. For all his mountaineering experience, Goran Krupp was not an experienced crack climber, potential failures of the gear itself, and bad luck. Goran's spring-loaded cam, which should have activated to widen and stick in the crack where it was placed, got yanked out. Then the carabiner holding the rope snapped as he continued to fall. 2 more camming devices he'd placed lower down on his climb also pulled out as Goran hit the ledge.
We were airlifted. Goran went to the morgue, was taken to the morgue. I ended up at the emergency room. I had a strangulation injury on my right arm. The rope wrapped around my arm and cinched it and damaging muscle structure and such. So they did the first aid there, and they got through to next of kin. We weren't married then, but still I had her name to give. And she immediately asked the nurse, is he okay? They said I was fine, and then immediately she knew, is Goran okay? And they said, we can't say, you're not next of kin. So she had a good idea about what had happened, and I made it back home. And when she returned home, we sat across the table, and I said, I have to do this now. And her response was, you will, you must. So we didn't look back. We had a condo overlooking Lake Union then, and we rearranged our lives. We had 2 cars. 1 car was sold. We sold that condo, moved to rental for a year, and then to a smaller place farther out. I went to his funeral in November of 2002 in Stockholm, Sweden. And on the way back from that, on the plane, I drew the world map on a piece of paper and marked the highest summit on each continent. And I said to myself, I'm going to go to these by human power, as had Goran. So the accident happened in September. I went to his funeral in November. February 1st, I was bicycling north to Alaska, towing my climbing gear, studded tires on my wheels, braving the packed snow and ice on the highways all the way to Alaska. I knew that if I covered 50 miles a day, I would get to Anchorage by mid-April. I got to Anchorage April 11th. So, yeah, it was
right
possible. And one just chips away at these big projects and eventually get to the destination. And that became my therapy. And I think the journey was more inward than northbound. And met my friends. We climbed Mount McKinley, Denali, in the original native name. And after we summited, we hurried back down. May 1st, we started walking in. May 29th, we summited. It was a long, arduous approach and everything else. And the team was tired. I was tired. And Nancy was coming for our wedding. And we were going to get married in Alaska. We thought that we would get married near Wonder Lake on the north side of the mountain. When our approach route changed to the mountain, we decided, okay, no need to go there. So she decided we would have our wedding near Homer, Alaska. We went to Sadie Cove by a rental powerboat. Guide took us into this fjord. There were glaciers at the end of this fjord, and on the side there were these 2 trees and a tiny beach where we could get the wedding party. And the night before the wedding party, we were given the assignment. We sought help from 2 Native American pipe carriers. They are the leaders of their community, holding their traditions alive through the ages. And they have the responsibility to carry out the formalities of life as it should be. And they are passing on traditions and history to the next generation. So Haida Simpson lady and an Inupiat man, they were both present. Pockets was his name. And the assignment that they gave us was to tie 500 prayer ties, and each had to be unique ahead of the ceremony. So prayer ties, we were going to use a non-synthetic cloth, put a pinch of tobacco in it, organic tobacco, and then tie it with cotton string at the end of a stick and make 500 of these. So we would have a bundle of them. So each one of them would have a unique prayer in it. And then these would be used to surround the ceremony site. and we would leave a gate to enter and gate to exit, and the ceremony would happen inside among these prayer ties. And then after the ceremony was complete, we would all exit, collect the prayer ties, burn them, and with the smoke, the prayers would become part of the universe. So it's a simple thought, but imagine coming up with 500 unique prayers. So we were all saying, okay, we want good health for our parents, right? So, okay, good. Put that in a prayer. And then you say, well, wait a minute. I want good health for my father, and I want good health for my father. So that's 2 prayers. So you just try to go through each one of these. And after a certain point, one runs out of prayers, right? You come to 367, and then, okay, what next? So we started cheating. The last 50 will be for world peace.
Not for socks with no holes or
but right. But the thing is, I think that the whole assignment was a way of giving a prospective couple the ability to negotiate and to work together and to get a task done. It's essentially a preview of a difficult life ahead, right? It was a beautiful ceremony. 2 big eagle wings came out of their ceremonial bags that they brought, and pipes came out, of course, and we were smudged with sage before entering the ceremonial circle. We didn't have a big party, and close friends were invited. So one of the requirements was that we would not take pictures during the ceremony. And the idea is that we needed to commit it to memory. And she flew home, I bicycled back, and that was our honeymoon. So her involvement has been from the get-go. And after that, of course, I cashed out my retirement funds and we made financial choices, as I said. And every choice we made going forward became our joint decision. How far should I push this? How far should I carry this? And she had me at risk. She had our livelihood at risk. And she was alone holding the fort for us and making sure that we still had a roof over our heads. And a common question was, well, what should I do if I got a new job and new offer? Things had to change. I said, well, home is where you are. So I had total understanding of what she should do if the opportunity presented itself, and that she had full control and full freedom to do anything that she could to advance her career and to make life easier for all of us. But then I had this task to get done. With limited funds, we relied on donations. Sponsorships were not forthcoming. Part of that had to be marketing, perhaps, and I find fault at my own marketing skills. I was never comfortable at promoting myself and stepping into the void that Goran left. The person died, and here I am doing something in his memory. That's my perspective. And using that as a healing journey. What others see, I wouldn't know, but given the little coverage that I got and some reaction that I got every now and then, could be that I was stepping into his shoes, maybe take advantage of this death. And that became part of my internal struggle, how much to promote myself and what to say and how much to be visible in the media. And then after a while, when the sponsorship efforts and the media outreach didn't happen as I needed or imagined, I just let that go. I said, okay, it doesn't matter. I'll do it anyway. So it became our own personal challenge with Nancy, and with the little help that we could generate from donors and close sponsors. Another big lesson that I took home from this journey was that I had set myself such a big goal, such a huge challenge, that to get it done, I had to move forward, taking many small steps in rapid succession, or just commit to big leaps. Each one of these added up, amounted to a record. And by the time I was done with the circumnavigation, I had become the first person to have rowed 3 oceans, first solo circumnavigation by human power, and a total of 15 Guinness World Records were registered. We said, so 15 records, that's not enough for sponsorship. How many would be enough? What's the threshold? We would just joke back and forth like that. And then I got back on the water during the pandemic. Arguably, that would be the safest place to be, alone on a boat on the water. So I rowed from California to Philippines, and that became the first crossing of the Pacific Ocean from North America to Asia. That was a crossing of 239 days total, including a month of stay at Hawaii, chasing visas, and 10 days in Guam, where Nancy visited, and we had Valentine's Day together before I relaunched from there, having gotten my booster shot too. So 239 days at sea total rowing, and all of those added up to the 1,084 days that we mentioned before. So my total records, the last record being North America to Asia, first crossing, now stands at 18. Do I have sponsors? I still don't.
Labyrinth is about feeling lost. And I'm wondering, at what point in this whole journey of being an adventurer you felt the most lost? Was it when you were back in the IT world, sitting in an office instead of being out there in the world? Was it when you watched your friend die in front of you? Was it when you went on this journey but you felt conflicted because it seemed like you had your vision and then the world had a different vision and didn't support you? Or is it now in the aftermath when you're like, I think I'm done, now what? Like, when have you felt the most lost and why?
I think the most difficult period for me was after I returned from my circumnavigation journey. So July 2012 is when I ended the journey back at Bodega Bay, where I had started the circumnavigation. Nancy had joined me in the last stages of my bicycle ride from Louisiana to the starting point. It was an overland bicycle ride. And during that whole time, her mother was in hospice care. And she was telling Mom can you hold on another week? I'll be there. So I made it to the finish. She was there. She saw it. And then the next day she flew to be with her mom. And there I was trying to connect with various media outlets to get the story out there, because I was done. And one of the challenges I had was everybody was waiting for me to finish the circumnavigation before they would write anything. So that effort felt meaningless to me. I spent maybe 2 days doing this, and then I said, what am I doing? This is not where I'm supposed to be.
Right.
And I said, I'm coming. I took the earliest flight to Perryville, and Mom was in and out of consciousness, and she recognized my voice. Are you there? And we connected, and I was there on time. Maybe 36 hours later, she was gone, and I was there to be able to help move her around, given it needed physical strength to be able to move her. And then eventually she went from hospice care at home to the hospital. And I remember the last night we were there with Nancy, and Mom came out of coma and asked for ice cream. There we were at 1 a.m. in the morning. I don't remember the time now, scrambling in the hospital, getting the nurses to open the cafeteria to get some ice cream, and they got just a scoop of ice cream for us and a little spoon. We gave her one spoon, and then she was out again, and that was it. She left after that, soon after that. So life is interesting with its twists and turns, and being able to be present and know where to pay attention is, I think, part of it too. And I really have grown to prioritize family and Nancy above all. Although I'm gone, she's never far away from my thoughts. And this is our journey together, though sometimes we walk in solitude on our respective paths to rejoin again, of course. Together we became stronger. We are better together, but we are not in need of each other.
What that sounds to me is like you guys have an incredible love story that you could write, where you talk about the adventures you've been on. She talks about the adventure that she was on at home and how you have come together. And like, I think that's a beautiful story. So I
Absolutely.
recommend you write it.
I have hesitated about writing for the longest time because I had my own demons to sort. So you were asking what was the most difficult part. Difficult part was reintegration into society, because I had been on this mission that defined who I was and what I was doing, and I became the journey. And then when I was off the journey, I was lost. And when I tried to share the journey, I didn't find the audience that I had hoped for. I couldn't find it during the journey. I didn't find it afterwards either. And when I had to pay back all our expenses, speaking engagements were not forthcoming. Without media coverage, there's no visibility. Without visibility, one is not famous, if you will.
Yeah.
And it's
a vicious cycle.
It's a cycle that needs to be completed. So that meant that, okay, so that wasn't enough what I did, therefore I should go and demonstrate mastery and I can go back out. But then I couldn't go back out because we had spent all our resources already.
Right.
So then I felt lost and I felt trapped, and that put me in a very dark space. And my friends had carried on with their lives. They had children that were older. They had moved on in their careers. Some had moved from one place to the other. So I was the one gone, and coming back and trying to catch up with everyone, I couldn't reconnect as easily. And I felt lonely. I felt isolated. I felt frustrated. I felt trapped, and that was not a good space to be. And yeah, I was suicidal. And I was not in charge of my life. And the one thing that I was still in charge of was my existence on this planet. That would be the last act of defiance, and the one thing that I was be in charge of. So yeah, I made the decision, and I was in charge of not doing that as well. And it took effort, it took time, it took the participation of Nancy again. After all of that she had been through, she was also now minding my mental well-being as well. And it was not easy. And we lived through that as well together. So that was a different phase of the journey. And when the pandemic hit, there I was thinking, well, I completed my circumnavigation in memory of Goran. With Nancy, we walked up Kosciuszko in Australia, and then climbed Kilimanjaro together in Africa. I had to bypass Everest, Elbrus, and Aconcagua on the sixth summit project that I had in mind in memory of Goran. So I thought, well, okay, I need to stop talking about this. I need to finish this project. I am not done yet. So let me go to Everest. But pandemic hit, everything shut down. Sponsorships, we weren't expecting any of that. So I said, let me get started toward Everest. I had a rowboat. All I had to do was prepare it and load food on it and get going. I was asking myself, am I waiting for another tragedy before I could launch? So I didn't want to be in a position where I would look back and say I should have launched earlier. And so that was one of the reasons why I launched on the Pacific, to prove to myself that, yeah, I didn't need a tragedy to motivate myself.
Always an adventurer.
I have 10 more years in me, I keep saying.
But while Erden set his sights on some new adventure, he decided it was time to retire his boat.
Because no matter what I do, it's just sitting by the house, nagging me to get back on the water, costing us more money. Now that I am setting my sights on a different path, I shipped my rowboat in a container to Turkey to a museum. That's where she's going to spend the rest of her days. And it'll be an inspiring story to kids over there, I hope. I would just urge everyone to honor their dreams and don't give up. Life goes on.
Erden Eruc is now preparing for the 2026 Golden Globe Race, a non-stop, single-handed, round-the-world yacht race.
This is a big deal. This has historic context. It'll start September 6th on a Sunday from Les Sables d'Olonne on the French coast. So it was an eventful first race in 1968. And Robin Knox Johnston became the first person to start from Northern Hemisphere, then go around Antarctica nonstop and come back unassisted.
Wow.
On the 50th anniversary of this, Don McIntyre, an Australian adventurer and sailor who has his own series of accomplishments, decided to start this race from scratch. So 2018 was the first time this race was run. One of the requirements for this race is that the vessels have to be built before 1988, standard full keel vessels, but the hull shapes of that era, 32 to 36 feet long, with no GPS, no chart plotter on board, no exotic materials. Fiberglass isn't allowed, but not carbon fiber or Dyneema or Kevlar kind of thing. No water maker. We start with the water tank that was installed back then on the boat, then maybe a couple jerry cans, and then collect rainwater as we go. So we have to make do with what we have on board. All these kinds of requirements are part of the definition of this race now. They're trying to recreate the conditions that existed for Robin Knox Johnston in 1968. So when we peel away all these modern conveniences like watermaker, GPS, chart plotter, so forth, what that leaves behind is the mariner, the able skipper. So it's trying to bring forth that mental fortitude and resilience and able to deal with solitude for the longest time and the wild southern oceans on such a small vessel. I do worry whether our safety will be compromised further, but that's what we prepare for, and that's what we will face. And we have to live up to that challenge, grow to become the sailors that the ocean will grant passage. So that's the big task ahead of me.
You can learn more about Erden and his adventures at erdeneruc.com.
In the meantime, get lost with us. Find us on Twitter at Amanda Knox.
At ManUnderBridge.
You can learn more about our work and how to support it at amandaknox.com. And while you may not have an ocean rowing voyage ahead of you, we hope you'll take Labyrinths on your next road trip. And until there is a world record for best podcast, please leave us a 5-star review.
Labyrinths is brought to you by Knox Robinson Productions. This episode was written and produced by us. Our managing producer is Andre Sapp, our production assistant is Charlie Darnell, and our theme music is by Josh Budo Karp. Hello, listener. This episode of Labyrinths could be ad-free, but that requires exclusive access. Your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to become a monthly Patreon subscriber, which will grant you access to top-secret patron-only content. This podcast will self-destruct without your support.
Was that too cheesy?
Who doesn't like cheese? Visit patreon.com/Knox Robinson.